Hi, everyone. Welcome to Angel Borrelli Pitching and Season 10, Episode 6 of the FIX. I am Angel Borrelli. In today's show, I am going to share with you some ideas I have about why, with technology and training methods improving every year, the number of pitching injuries has not gone down. My favorite guy, Albert Einstein, said, "You cannot find a solution to a problem by using the same eyes that created the problem." I have taken that statement to heart throughout my career, and today I want to talk about huge mistakes I see on the field that can contribute to problems for pitchers and their bodies, and even bigger mistakes I see in the gym with what pitchers are doing and, even more importantly, not doing. To help me with these topics is my co-host, former minor league pitcher Joe Demers, who, by the way, remained uninjured throughout his 20 years as a pitcher and started lifting weights with me when he was 11 years old. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Angel. I'm very excited about this topic as it's something that relates to both of us very closely.
I know. And the fact that you're going to be not only on the field, working with baseball pitchers, but also, having a sense of what they need to be doing off the field or what they could be doing off the field that makes your job harder on the field. And with the number of injuries, I mean, I just heard the statistic that I heard that really brought this to home to me is they were talking about the fact that there's a 33% increase in guys who throw 100 miles an hour and
Increase in what?
increase in velocity. And they're throwing less innings before, how they're being pulled now, but
Yeah.
there's an increase in injuries. And I also see an increase in repeat injuries. Do you see how out of balance that is?
Yeah, they think they're protecting pitchers, but whatever they're doing isn't working, obviously.
Yeah, it's not working. And I also think there's a contradiction that I keep seeing where things that they're saying and doing to protect, but then yet they're letting things happen that people who work in the field of sports science understand that because of the nature of the injuries, that something is not making sense here. So, yeah, I mean, it's like saying we don't want you to get injured and we want to be careful with the innings you're throwing, but yet not realizing that right before their very eyes, they're fatiguing their arms and stretching out their ligaments before they even get on the mound. And I think that's what the biggest problem is. So,
Totally.
what I want to do is talk about some of the things that I've seen and noticed that are bothering me. And I think for all you coaches out there and also for your pitchers, my job is to put this information into your head. If it works for you, cool. If it doesn't, fine. But at least it's there. And then if one day you wake up and say, wait a minute, then you'll have the information. And I'm not going to stop in my plight of protecting pitchers. And by the way, just so everybody knows, I do get letters all the time from coaches asking me questions about training, et cetera, because I do have a reputation for having pitchers that don't get injured. Now, I'm lucky because pitchers that come to me at a young age, they stay with me so that for years I'm working with them, making sure their mechanics stay as efficient as possible, making sure
Clean.
yes, clean, making sure that as their bodies change, that they're also changing the way they use it to accommodate it and also controlling what they do in the gym. The best weapon we have for protecting pitchers is what they do off the mound. And there's not enough of, I don't think there's enough thought going into that. The reason why I can say that with almost confidence is when I see injuries. Now, here's the injuries that to me are the ones that should not be happening because they're preventative if you understand the role they play in the motion. So, for example, we've had tons of oblique injuries. The obliques should not be getting injured. The obliques to me are injury that happens because of what pitchers are doing in the gym. Second, we keep seeing the same thing. Flexor pronator mass strain. This is a fatigue of the forearm a fatigue of the wrist, the fingers. Now, if we have muscles that are getting strained, meaning strain, T, tendon, we have muscles that are getting strained. That means that that pitcher is throwing, his skill is way better than the strength of his forearm muscle. Now, this is a simple thing. If the minute a pitcher gets a strain in his forearm muscle, assuming that he's throwing correctly, this has to be an issue of not having enough strength, meaning his muscle is fatiguing too soon. As he keeps on pitching, it then becomes compromising to the tendon of that muscle. So, if once you have that injury, your first thing should be, whoa, I got to get better arms. I've got to have better forearms. I need stronger forearms. I need forearms that don't fatigue as much. So when you see that injury and you see it over and over again, somebody's not connecting that dot. Third, look at the Tommy John surgeries that are happening.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that starts usually with forearm fatigue, but the breakdown of the ligament, this again, first of all, unless it's an acute injury, the ligament doesn't just boom, tear. It's something that's been going on. So, what does that mean? This is like putting a security system into your house. You've got cameras on the outside. Let's say you even have dogs. Let's say you've got signals. You've got this, you've got that. And then somebody breaks into your house. Well, what you put on the external side did not work.
Hmm.
Now, the way the body is designed is that the ligament is deep connective tissue. It's the deepest, and it connects the bones together. And we know that the ligaments go under a strain from pitching. And we also know that the ligaments, with what they say they can handle in force, pitching can produce more than that. So what does that mean? Well, how do we protect the bones and ligaments? And this is true for just human beings. We don't want our ligaments exposed. Well, our muscles do that. And depending on if you're just a normal person walking around or if you're someone that uses your body, you have to develop those muscles so they are your external protective mechanism. And the muscles have tendons that insert into those bones. So the reason why we get the muscles strong is to keep, that's like having better cameras, better views on the outside of your security system.
Great way to put it.
Yeah, and if the role of those muscles, if they're asleep at the wheel, then the enemy gets down to the basic level. So, if you've got a flexor pronator mass strain, meaning the tendons and the muscles are out of whack, and you don't address that as a weakness in not the muscle, but the weakness in your training program. This is a weakness in the training program because this strain and this fatigue happens over time. And fatigue is a huge deal. And a fatigued muscle is a muscle that can't handle the motion that the pitcher's doing, which means, once again, his skill is above the level of the muscles. And by the way, there is a time when a pitcher realizes that. He may be going along fine, but the first day that you've got fatigue in the forearm or strain, which usually starts with it feeling tight and it's not recovering, that's your first sign. In fact, you should congratulate yourself. Whoa, my skill's advancing. And you know that because let's say your velocity is going up, which everybody's trying to make that happen. So the signs are there that you
You
have
gotta
to,
listen.
exactly, you have to build the strength. Now, if your forearm is getting tight, that's your major arsenal against having the elbow joint start to have problems. And we do know that forearm issues are a contributor, and usually it's a precursor to actually having, ligament damage. So you've got all these signs. Once you build it, once you have strain, then you're building the protection against the ligaments. So if you let the one thing go, the next thing's going to be inevitable. The other thing is I keep seeing this stuff about pitchers that have shoulder tightness or they have rear shoulder problems. To me, one of the biggest things I see in the gym and one of the biggest things I see when I'm watching pitchers pitch is there seems to be a lack of understanding about the spine and about the way the trunk musculature works and about the way deceleration happens. Everyone knows who studies anything about the pitching motion. The first thing they'll say is the deceleration forces are the greatest forces of the motion. So, with that being said, you have to understand what decelerates the body at the time it's going forward, and it has to decelerate the acceleration. This is why I'm a fanatic about follow throughs being more efficient. And I've seen more pitchers with great follow throughs this year than I ever have. So somewhere they're getting smart. And by the way, the pitchers that are the most jacked, they have the best follow throughs because they know how to control their bodies. But if you have a bad follow through, and you're falling all over the place and your spine isn't able to decelerate, you're going to have a rear shoulder problem because the rear shoulder is decelerating the arm, but your spine and your trunk are decelerating the upper body and your arms attached to that. So they kind of go hand in hand. And the pitchers that are on the IL for shoulder issues, when I look at their, mechanics, and I don't do an analysis, I just watch them, because you can see general qualities of pitchers that have solid finishes. Do you know what I mean by a solid finish, right, Joe?
Yeah, like nose through the catcher, it's kind of not falling off to either side.
Yeah, or having control over that acceleration, the acceleration force, and usually it involves having a very solid front leg.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think that when I see these things, and then then I also hear myths that go on about the way pitchers should train or not train in the gym, yet the problems that they're having, these are things that need to be taught in the gym. You learn about your body structure in the gym. So when you go to the mound, you bring an improved body every time you go to the mound, and that's how we avoid injuries.
And that's how you get better.
Exactly, exactly. And just to put this in perspective for a second before we start getting into some of the mistakes I see, I want everyone to just wrap their brain around this because the number of movements so we want pitchers to have consistent pitching deliveries, which means that he's going to lift his knee X number of times. He's going to stride and land X number of times. He's going to rotate X number of times. So just wrap your brain around this for a second. So let's say a pitcher gets in a bullpen before a game and let's say he throws 28 pitches. So let's say he pitches 7 innings and let's say he's really efficient and he let's say he goes 15 innings or 15 pitches per inning, excuse me. That's 105 pitches. So we've got 28 in the bullpen, 105 in the game. Then we've got 42 pitches if he's throwing 6 pitches before each inning.
The warm up pitches.
Yes.
Yeah.
He has now produced 175 pitches for that game.
There you go.
Yeah. Now that is a conservative number. So if you're doing something in your motion that's unnecessary, let's say it's forced because it's not efficient. And let's say you're a good pitcher, but you're not using the muscle exactly the way it likes. Or let's say it's excessive. It's an excessive use of the muscle because, again, it's not in the right place at the right time. So the movement is altered. Muscles can be trained to have endurance, power endurance, which is what we need for pitchers. But if you're using a muscle that is designed to do one thing and you're using it in a way it's not designed, it's going to fatigue way faster. And also, other muscles will be collateral damage. So, we know that fatigue is the number one reason for injuries. So, if that's true, then our first thing is to one, have muscles that don't fatigue because they're well trained and they're trained correctly. And that also, primarily, we never induce fatigue unnecessarily. There is going to be an amount of fatigue that goes along with pitching. Fatigue happens on a number of levels. It can happen in a central way where it's like you're just getting tired. It can happen in a neuromuscular way where the nerve itself that feeds the muscle, it's firing and the chemistry of that's changing. There are a number of different types of fatigue. The fatigue that a pitcher never acknowledges is the one that's going on in his head. He's never going to give up the ball. But there are many types of fatigue. So, with that being said, if we know that the biggest enemy is fatigue of a muscle, we know that we've got to approach that from two levels. One is avoid fatiguing the muscle before you pitch. And then the minute you're done pitching, because we know you're going to have fatigue on all those levels, you restore your body to a place of where there is no fatigue. And you do that in the gym and you do that with recovery days.
What are some things guys do before they pitch that could fatigue?
Excellent question. I was just getting to that.
Awesome.
Okay, so Joe, that is a great question. And we are going to talk about some of the things I see on the field. And I want you to comment on this because one of the first things I do with pitchers, it just so happens, is that you establish a system of what you do before you pitch.
Hmm.
Now, here's the things that I see on the field because I'm on the field all the time and I'm working when there's sometimes games going on, and sometimes another pitcher's warming up, but I see what other pitchers do. They're not my clients, they're on the team. And this is where I say there's a contradiction. Coaches, if you don't want your pitchers to get injured, and if you clearly understand that fatigue is the simplest thing you can do, that you want them to avoid this, then for you to, on game day, have your pitchers doing certain things or letting them do it. I know you coaches don't have control over certain things, but I had a coach call me really upset over the fact that his first three starters were all on the IL in the first week, and they all had been doing things he didn't like the looks of, but he let them do it. And then when they were all injured, then he decided to put his foot down and say, "Hey, if you wanna do this, you do it outside of the field. You don't come and do it on game day." So, to understand, and the medical world, ASMI has on their list of reasons for injury, pitching with a fatigued muscle. So, here's the things first of all, warming up is the most critical thing. So there's many programs out there, and what I'm glad to see is that at least people are warming up. Now, my program, for those of you who own it, know that, and this information comes with the program, the band that you use is 5 pounds or less. And Joe, have you been using the exact same band since you were 10 as you finished as you were 25? The same weight?
Absolutely. And that was something that was a little hard at first, is to just know that it's a warm up. As a pitcher, you kind of want to get a burn going just because you're used to working out, but you don't want to be using too heavy of a band or you'll get tired.
Exactly. The burn means that you're loading the muscle and fatiguing it.
Yeah. So no burn.
Yes, and I have a pitcher right now who's 15, was moved to varsity his second week in freshman year. He's been doing my program, no injuries for 5 years. He's, high 80s.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, he's an excellent pitcher. In fact, congratulations to him. Their team just won the perfect game of their first game of the perfect game. He pitched first 5 innings and, did a great job.
Awesome.
And he told me that all the guys tease him because he uses a band. It weighs 5 pounds or less. It's an extra light band. It has a handle, which is required for my program. And they tease him because his band is so light. And he says to them, it's a warm up, not a workout. So I'm at the field one day, or I forget if a new client came in or whatever, they were doing a program. And I looked at the band. I said, "Can I feel that band for a second?" And this is a popular program that is done. Joe, when I went to like just do a reverse fly, which I just kind of pulled the band away just to see how it felt,
Yeah.
it was heavy.
A lot of guys use that.
Exactly. And so, number one, why would you do a workout to when a muscle isn't warmed up and you're using it as your warm up? And you're doing the motions that are designed to duplicate the motions in the joints. So number one, if you're doing using a heavy band, it is a workout, not a preparation. You should not even feel the weight. It should be bringing blood in. So that's the first thing, using too heavy of a band. Secondly, why would you do activities on game day that we know fatigue the muscle? Because one, they either are using a method that doesn't even simulate pitching, or they're using something that is of a different weight. Now, I'm not a fan of any exotic things because I believe pitching is a precision skill. So it's just like, golfers don't hit a big ball off the tee. They know they've got to feel the weight of that ball. They don't go out and putt. I mean, golfers are neurotic about what they do, but they at least get it right in the sense that they know that if they try do anything that is less or more than what they're supposed to do, they can lose the feel. And that's one thing about golf. Golfers are intense about having the feel. And that is why things that are exotic, these methods can, I think, disrupt the precision. With that being said, pitchers get to choose, and so do coaches, what you want your guys to do. If you think this is something helpful, fine. But before pitching, the same day as pitching, respect the skill, do not disorient the body and all the receptors in the joints with things that either one, they're a bigger size, like a big ball, or like a softball size instead of a baseball, or something where the ball they're throwing weighs less or more, or they're throwing a distance that is not a distance that is going to be required for them in the game. And to remind everybody, that's 60 feet, 6 inches. And also doing things that we know produce more forces around the joint of the elbow, the joint of the shoulder. We do not do things like that before you pitch because why would you do something like throwing distance that's further than what you need, but also introducing the same or more forces than what you're going to produce in a game. So when you're on the field and you're doing things like this, the other thing is this has been out there for years. And if you have a strength coach that doesn't know this, tell him to do some research. And if the strength coach is the guy responsible, when you this is stretching before the game. I see pitchers and I see the ball players sitting on the ground doing what's called a static stretch. Now, I always knew this, but finally some research came out. And by the way, it's been out since I think the late 90s, maybe the early 2000s. They measured the strength of a hamstring muscle prior to doing anything. And then they had group one do a static stretch, and they had group two do what we call active stretching, which can look like exactly what a static stretch looks like, but you stretch, you come up, down, up, down, up. So you're using the muscle in an active way. You're bringing blood in just like a warm up, and you're just keeping it active. The muscle that was stretched lost its strength by, oh, I don't, in fact, don't quote me on this, but like some huge percentage, like 50% of its strength, something huge. And then they monitored that
Wow.
muscle. Yes, they monitored that muscle to see, and they did this with hamstrings. they monitor that muscle to see when did that hamstring recover 100% of its strength. And I remember thinking, man, you're already into the third inning by the time that thing's recovered. So it is already fatigued and it doesn't get to its normal strength for almost an hour.
Hmm.
So so here you are going into the beginning of a game. I don't care if you're a runner. This is true for hitting because they have the guys do this. They do it. I see everyone holding tricep stretches. So active stretching is we now know is critical pre-performance. So if you're out on the field putting more forces on a joint, making the muscles work hard, doing things that aren't even necessary for your skill, and you're stretching muscles incorrectly, think about what that does. Think if you're a guy that does, like I see guys using weighted ball throws right before. And it is sad because guys try to emulate what major league players do. And there are guys who can get away with doing certain things, but that still doesn't make it right. And it still doesn't mean that as a practitioner, I can't recommend that because I know too much. But it doesn't even make sense in your head. But this is a common thing which they're thinking, oh, this helps me throw harder. Well, you're fatiguing the muscle. And that's the number one reason why you can get injured. But also, too, your muscle can't produce it as it produces its maximal force, which is what you want from throwing, especially in the shoulder. It's going to get fatigued sooner if you get into the game and your chemistry gets going, and now you've got fatigue that already had set in. And remember, when you're exerting certain forces, your chemistry of your muscle is changing. So things can happen that you didn't intend on. So the day of pitching is critical. So number one, these injuries that are happening, which to me look like training injuries and not reading your body injuries. For example, if you're throwing weighted balls before you pitch, do you think that would affect your wrist and forearm?
It would make it fatigued, I would assume.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't like it being done ever, but not on days that you pitch. Also, remember when you are doing things, this is true for training in a gym or some of the exotic methods. If you're doing methods that are producing fatigue in the muscle, and believe me, this isn't something you always feel, but you just have to know it. And you have to believe us scientists when we say, hey, there's like three, four types of fatigue, some of which you're not going to feel. But the muscle is in there feeling it. Your chemistry is in there feeling it. Your nerves are in there feeling it. If you're going to do something like that, make sure you give your body time to recover from it. If you're doing some exotic stuff on day one, you might not want to be pitching on day two. You have to recover from your methods as much as you need to recover from the day of pitching. And then as you start to intertwine recovery with the activity, then that activity can actually possibly get you the improvement, which is the reason why you think it's working anyway. So these are simple things that happen where the pitcher, and this is when it's the most dangerous, once he's on the field. So these are things right now. Take a look at your teams, take a look at your methods, and pitchers, think about this. Find ways that are not insulting to the body before you pitch. Respect your body, baby it that day, but get ready. When I say baby, I mean do what you have to do in terms of getting ready, but make sure it's not fatiguing. It should be done with with the speed you're going to play with. It should be done with things that weigh the same, and it shouldn't. That's not the day where you work on and fatigue shoulder muscles and elbow muscles doing certain things because you think it's going to make you throw harder. That should have happened well before that day.
Yeah, they say save your bullets for the game.
Hey, I love that. That's exactly right.
Don't want to air it out on warm ups, you know?
Exactly, exactly. So, okay, so now let's move to the gym. So, Joe, you know what? I entitled this section when I was making notes, Gym Violations. Seriously, someone should be giving the pitchers tickets for these things that I see them doing which I say to myself, do they not get how this could be ruining their motion, or do they not understand how they could be leaving themselves open for injuries? And being that I have spent, you know, X number of years, I've been in the gym for like lots of decades, not just training, but then also becoming a professional. And I think there's a lack of understanding generally about what pitchers do in the motion. And I think the things that I hear strength coaches do, because, to my listeners, I have pitchers and players all over the country that have worked with me maybe when they were a pitcher and they're not a pitcher anymore, that call me, especially when they have some kind of pain, because they know that one of my jobs is connecting. Why is that pain happening? What could you be doing? So I have knowledge of tons of programs that go on, not just at high schools and colleges, but in minor leagues. And unfortunately, in the major leagues, where I see things where the strength coaches are getting it wrong. Now, there is no one strength coach that I know on a professional level that gets the opportunity to just work with one position. I'm lucky, but I also was smart. When I was a strength coach before I got my master's and I decided I wanted to work with pitchers, I knew that to be good, I needed to eat, sleep, and drink pitching because I respect the motion that much. And so this is gonna sound like a criticism to strength coaches when I say these things are not right, but, they they have tons of athletes they have to work with, and I think the first thing that a strength coach has to do is understand the motion and then try to design a program. Also, they have to be really careful, and so in their heads, they're gonna make a decision that may be of less risk to them, but also in the end, it may not be helping them. So this is not a slant to any strength coaches, but almost to give permission to look further into some of the programs because just with the arm itself. I mean, I had a pitcher tell me that he never did an arm exercise with his strength coach.
Any arm exercise at all?
Exactly.
Wow.
I know, right? And then the things that were being done didn't even make sense. And this has happened more than one time.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard it all.
Yeah. And yes, and when you've seen when you see that the priority injuries for pitchers have to do with forearm and elbow, then that should tell you that if you're getting pain there, or if it's fatiguing, or if it's straining and then tearing, or spraining, which is a ligament sprain, you know that your muscles are not doing their jobs. The job of the muscle is to protect those delicate structures. Plus, the muscle is what contracts to produce the velocity that everyone wants. So, why you can, in one sense, say, I'm going to do this to improve velocity, and it can be questionable if that's gonna work anyway, but I'm not gonna do this to improve the strength of the muscle. A strong muscle is a powerful muscle. If you wanna improve velocity, you have to start with your architecture. I don't care if you love the exotic things, you've gotta make a muscle stronger, and the only way you can create strength in a muscle is by remodeling the inside of the architecture of that muscle to make it bigger, allow for more fiber development, teach fiber recruitment. And I'm talking about doing it in a way where it changes things, where it actually forces the muscle to remodel itself. Things that you do, I don't care if you throw a 10-pound ball and you think you're strengthening your arm, that 10-pound ball that you just threw is not going to remodel the inside of your shoulder. Systematic overload training is what has to happen. And I don't think there's enough of this. Yet there's a lot of emphasis on improving velocity. There's a lot of emphasis on, oh, we've got this drill or this thing, and here's this ball, or here's this belt, or here's this hook this to your body thing. But it is not doing what you think it's doing. And the main thing it needs to do is to prevent injuries, because I don't care if you can throw 100 and maybe you can throw strikes, but if you can't throw for more than 3 games in a season because you're always injured. Well, you've got to take a look at the body that you're using to do all of that. And Joe,
Exactly.
you never had an injury and you never once missed a workout. I can't, you never missed a start, did you?
I got hit in the leg once and missed one start in college.
Okay. But other than that,
Yeah.
you were available.
Yeah, other than that.
Right. Yeah, and you guys used to come in after practice and train. You were all, so committed.
Yeah.
And the thing is that and this is how you become successful. So, let's talk about what I see in the gym. Number 1, I've been obsessed with this. These oblique injuries, they should not be happening. The obliques are the muscles that rotate your trunk and in hitting and in pitching, obviously. And they are 2 layers of obliques that we have, the outer and the inner, external and internal. And the external, so if you're a right-handed pitcher, the obliques on the right side of your body are rotating you to the left because you rotate to the left. They're called opposite side rotators. And there's muscles underneath that, the internal, that rotate you to the same direction. They're on the opposite side. So it's a complex system. And oblique injuries should not be happening. If they were common to the pitching motion, everyone would have them. But I started noticing a few years ago that everybody started doing a lot of medicine ball training and a lot of crazy stuff for the rotators, where they were loading the body, they were loading and doing strange positions with medicine balls, not really showing an understanding of the way the trunk musculature works. So one of the most common medicine ball exercises I see is people sit on their sits bones. They're sitting down. They bring their knees up. They've got a ball in their hand. They touch it side to side. Can you picture that, Joe?
Yeah, like Russian twists.
Yes, yes. Well, Russian twist is actually something different, but this is you're sitting with the knees, and it's you're just going back and forth.
Okay.
So the position of the body is very strange. In order to hold that position, you have to be contracting everyone knows what a six pack looks like. Okay, that six pack is not a rotating group of muscles. It's down the middle, and the muscles on the side cut into it. Okay. While you're in that strange position, sitting up, doing medicine ball throws, you are contracting in your abdominals to maintain the people I see doing it, they're in a flexed position. Well, the obliques are also flexors. That's something people don't understand. So the
Interesting.
deal, yeah, they play a role. So if you're
Yeah.
in a strange position, also you're trying to stabilize the spine, and the obliques actually are flexors of the spine to the side. You've got muscles you're trying to train to be fast. This is why you're doing it, thinking, "Oh, I'll swing the bat faster, I'll pitch faster." And rotational speed is the speed you want to create velocity. You're taking those muscles and asking them to do too many things at one time, and you don't get clean contractions. Plus,
Mhm.
when you're using a medicine ball, you're holding it. That changes the whole structure of your shoulder girdle. And now you've got misplacement of that. And so you end up with a little bit of a mess. And the obliques, because of their length, they're not really designed to be muscles where you want to add a lot of weight to it. They're like structural muscles that you want them to be fluid and quick. So, obliques, these injuries, I believe, are coming from strange things that are being done. And so, anybody who's had an oblique injury, or coaches, if you have kids that are having oblique injuries, find out what they're doing in the gym. So, rotation is critical for pitchers, but the rotation starts with the pelvis. And so if you're gonna train anything, you've gotta train the ability for a pitcher to understand the way his pelvis is involved, and doing exercises that are clean rotational exercises. And by the way, I know I did a podcast on my favorite rotation exercises, so you can tune into that, but be very careful when you add medicine balls or weight that's being thrown into a wall, because it changes the structure because you're holding an implement. So if you're holding a 10-pound medicine ball or these real big black heavy balls, the way your body is doing that is changing the way and the length of those muscles, because when you're using a weight to train a muscle that doesn't necessarily like that, your body, other body parts have to stay stable, and that compromises the way your trunk musculature is. So it's very hard to do those and actually know that you're targeting the rotation muscles. So be very careful about what you're doing in the gym for rotation. And in my opinion, there should never be weight added to that, because you can change the movement pattern, and so you're not getting any bang for your buck. Does that make sense, Joe? We didn't. I know that we tried. I think I've gone through every method of doing things, but if you notice, things would drop off. Maybe I don't even remember if you and I ever threw a medicine ball, but I do know I experimented. My opinions are based on knowledge.
We would just do like body weight twists, like with the
Yes.
towel, lean back with the towel. That was a good one.
Yes, right. And yes, leaning back on the floor flat, using the legs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so everybody, these oblique injuries, just take a look at them from a perspective of training, not so much what the pitcher's doing in his motion. The second thing that worries me, and this worries me for every human being, is these hamstring pulls and low back issues that are coming up from, and there's a specific exercise that I see in the gym. And when I started seeing it being done, it surfaced years ago. I shook my head and I said, something's not right. Hip thrusts, where you're laying across a bench, your upper body is leaning on a bench, your knees are bent, and then you're using your butt, which is down below the level of the bench, and you're pushing your butt up. First of all, you're only working a short distance, a short level. And I know I have chiropractors that listen to my podcast. I never saw this as healthy for the low back. It's just too much. And then they would put an Olympic bar with 45s on each side on their thighs. So when they push their butt up into the air, they would get a stronger force. Well, the glute is isolated on this. I just don't know how healthy it is. But here's what I see as a problem: hamstring injuries are a number one problem for anybody who runs. And runners love to do things like this. But because your knees are bent, and you're going into a stretch position of the glute, that's also the hamstring being stretched. And this is complicated, but you're taking a two joint muscle and contracting it at both ends, and they give you a cramp. It'll give you a deep feeling in your hamstrings that does not feel good. It's called, there's two things: active and passive insufficiency for a muscle. And this is when the mechanisms inside the muscle, they get locked into a contraction place, or they get locked into a place where the muscle's overstretched, and then the components in the muscle can't make a contraction. The other one is it's made too much of a contraction and it can't pull apart. And either way, it kind of freezes the mechanism inside the body. This causes active insufficiency, and it will knot your hamstrings. And do you know what I'm talking about, Joe?
Yeah, I've totally cramped while doing that exercise. So
Exactly. Exactly. So now you take that exercise, you think you're feeling something great because you're cramping. Then you get on the field. It's very hard for that deep knot to let go. In fact, a lot of times there's a knot deep down in the hamstring that you don't know about, but the hamstring feels tight. And then you try to run, and the front of your leg, the muscle that produces speed on the front, is really nice and it's at a really good length. But the muscle in the back doesn't have its normal length. And the next thing, you lift your knee and you run, or you take your first step and you pull a muscle. So, strength coaches, I know everyone uses these. And I did, out of scientific endeavor, one day, and this was just a year ago, because I have always looked at it for years and said, this is not good. But I said, okay, let me try this. And in 1 second, my hamstrings, and I knew, and I thought, this is so dangerous, and that people are doing it is scary to me. If you have your feet further apart and they're not as flexed, that would be a healthier way to do it, but I'm not sure you could maneuver the weight that you're trying to handle. But if that knee is in a 90 degrees of flexion, meaning your lower leg would be perpendicular, the bone be perpendicular. As you're thrusting upward, you are going to get a pulling in your hamstring. So, for any of you who suffer from hamstring injuries, that's another one exercise in the gym that I think needs to be thought about.
Yeah. What else could you do to target the glutes instead of hip thrusts?
Well, all leg exercises, unless you're sitting down and isolating a knee joint, everything, your hips are going to work. So that exercise is done for the glutes and hamstrings. And so glutes and hamstrings are worked on most exercises if you're doing it correctly. And some recruit it more. So if you're recruiting and you want just the back of your body to be recruited, RDLs are critical.
Mm-hmm.
Deadlifts, whether they're from the ground, and that's usually off-season stuff, but below the knee deadlifts off of racks is another exercise that focuses on that. Where you put your feet on a leg press, if the feet are up high on the pad, you're going to recruit more hamstring than you will quad, and if you lower the feet down, you'll get more quad. So they've done,
There you go.
yeah, and everything I'm saying comes from looking at EMG reports. So, because I had to do analysis of movements when I was in graduate school, and I also have tons of books where other great researchers have targeted, and in science, they're always looking for, what recruits this muscle more than another, and they compare exercises because, in graduate school, these are projects, so you think up things to look for. And so we know these things. Plus, once you do them, and of course, all of this requires having good technique. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, Joe, and there are many more things I see, but just to keep this concise, I want to get right to what I don't see. So, number one, the first thing we talked about with forearm injuries. The forearm is a complex group of muscles, and the tightness, flexor pronator mass strain, flexion of the wrist, pronation, meaning the rotation of the forearm. This is a muscle group that is critical, starts in the fingers, goes through the wrist, up into the forearm, and inserts on the inside of the forearm or the outside if you're talking about extensors of the wrist. So, training fingers, forearms, and wrists is critical. I do not see pitchers doing enough of this. And if you have forearm problems, you have to attack the radio-ulnar joint, which is the rotational joint that's located on the outside of your forearm with the palm up, the elbow joint, which is the ulnar and the humerus. You have to do exercises for that, for the forearm and the upper arm. You have to do specific wrist exercises so that you're innervating the muscles that come from the fingers through the wrist. And you have intrinsic muscles of the hand, meaning that they're only in the fingers and the hands. And you have to do like rice bucket training to do that. If you're not doing these things and you have forearm issues, I guarantee that if you train them, you're going to have success. Now, that's why when I see all these injuries, I'm wondering what are they doing in the gym? Because the gym should be the precursor, and in off season, you should really be blasting this. But the day after you pitch, within 24 hours of pitching, you should be restoring these muscles with exercises. And then, of course, you're taking the appropriate days of recovery after that. So when you go to the mound, your forearm's not only recovered, but it recovered beautifully because you used it in a very straightforward way in the gym. And secondly, it gets stronger from that. Whenever you're doing a skill, your hand's turning, your wrist is turning, like all day long, we're turning our hand, our wrist is movement. The thing about the gym that's so beautiful is it takes those muscles, and we don't do a lot of different angles with one exercise. You might have an exercise that targets a certain position of the wrist, but you're not doing that position plus another one plus another one. And the beauty of that is you're taking each direction of that joint and specializing and making it work in the way it's designed. And when you get those, let's say a joint has three possible planes of motion it works in. When you get those three planes exercised cleanly in a gym, then they're able to go and act in a compound, complex way once they're performing a skill. So to not see that type of training being primary, and the reason why I know it's not primary is because there's too many injuries. There wouldn't be injuries, and the reason I know this is I emphasize that training. And I've worked with maybe now over 1,000 pitchers. I mean, that would be, let's see, 28 years. I mean, yeah, I could probably say that at least hundreds and hundreds. And I know the difference that that type of training makes. And also, when I'm doing a forensic analysis on video, when pitchers call me and they have pain in certain area, usually I am going to see a deficiency in the way they're using that part of the body. So again, training it correctly helps you use it correctly. So that's kind of a big deal for me. And I know you loved your arm training. And I think you always said that you felt like that was what had kept you from or allowed you to get through grueling tournaments, et cetera.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to have a strong arm if you're going to use it 170, what did we say, 178 times in a day?
Yeah, yeah, that's if you're throwing only 7 innings and
Yeah.
if it's 15 pitch inning. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that drives me crazy is I don't think there's enough emphasis on correct position of the spine and the pelvis during activities. So I see squats being done incorrectly. I see the follow through not being done correctly. I don't think that, and this is one reason I love an RDL for a pitcher because it gives the pitcher enough hip strength to where he's comfortable with his body weight being out over his front leg.
Hmm.
And not being in the front leg when you pitch is probably one of the biggest issues I see in pitching, and especially now where pitchers are trying to throw harder and it's throwing their timing off. And I see pitchers that are using their front leg the way hitters do. And I'm a front leg fanatic, and I have done many podcasts on this. But one of the things is I like to look at developmental stuff. Like I'm always looking at the glove arm and why is the glove arm so weird? Why do pitchers do weird things with their wrists and their glove arm? And I think it's from being a kid and having a glove that is so big that the wrist just bends. And so I think because glove arms are one of the biggest problems in efficient mechanics. So I look at this front leg and I notice that, hitters have to pull the front leg, but they pull the front knee backward because they don't want their body weight to go forward. They have to pull back to be stable so they can bring their arms forward. A pitcher has to do the opposite. He has to get into his front leg so he can rotate over the axis of his front leg. What happens with pitching is, and no one catches this and no one even talks about it, is because it looks so normal because you see hitters doing it, is pitchers start to go into their front leg and then they pull their knee back for stability. Well, that is a lazy way of getting stability. Also, the pitcher's center of mass is in between both legs instead of being over the front leg. What happened to old school mechanics where they were trying to teach get your head over your front foot? This is not being taught anymore, and so pitchers have got hip weakness, and so they pull the knee back, which by the way, there's nowhere in life where pulling the knee back like that behind the front foot even is healthy, but it's the way hitters do it. They're not as spread out in a stride the way a pitcher is. So it works for them. And I'm not a hitting instructor, so I don't want to comment on that anymore. But I think that is where the habit of pulling the knee backward came from, because every kid hits before they pitch. But in pitchers need to understand that they've got to move their center of mass into an axis. They can't get caught in the middle. You have to come off the back leg, and you do that by your hip muscle. up on the side of your pelvis and get into your front leg, and then you can rotate. So, here again, if you're not doing rotation exercises that help you understand that you've got to rotate over your front leg, you're not just sitting down. That's another reason for having good rotational exercises. But two, having an understanding of where things happen in the motion helps you develop the right exercise. So, for example, RDLs teaches a pitcher, as long as he's doing them right, to be able to flex at the hip, have a perfect low back position. Therefore, his upper body is out over his front foot. And that's the same thing when you're doing a deadlift in the off season. You're learning how to have the weight be under you and you be committed to being over the weight instead of the way mechanics are sometimes looked at in pitching, where you pull the front knee back and now you're in no man's land. And then you're trying to extend out with your release, but your hand is only a few inches in front of your foot. Where if you had weight in the front leg, you'd be out in front. So again, I see a lack of instruction in the stride. And when you see all these elbow injuries, if your stride isn't right, you can't rotate correctly. And if you don't rotate correctly, you're going to have arm placement that's not going to be correct. And then you're going to end up with elbow problems. So the gym is the place where coaches work on strides, work on getting into the front leg, have teach the back leg to be strong as a stabilizer, not as something that's supporting you because you're pulling backwards. And I think that's when I look in the gym and I see that these skills are not being practiced, and they are skills for when you're in season. Those are in season type skills that need to be always embedded.
Yeah, pitchers got to get comfortable being in that front leg.
Yeah, absolutely. And then being able to lean over and appropriately use the back leg for stability for that. Now, the last thing I want to cover is, because this drives me crazy, and I have three scenarios that I want to talk about. And then, Joe, you can tell me if you've heard, or if you have you ever been exposed to a strength coach that told you that you could not go overhead?
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of them actually think that we pitch overhead, so we don't need to train overhead because we use it enough, and they think it's fatigued. But I think you got to use it to get stronger.
Yeah, yeah, and so I don't know if anybody is thinking this through all the way, or again, like I said, they work for organizations that maybe they don't have any control. But pitching, there is nothing wrong with overhead movements. Every movement is solid that you do in the gym as long as you do it correctly. When you're doing a military press, let's say, you've got a rotator cuff that's in a very perfect position. You're in a scapular plane, perfect positioning. Certain muscles are working that are getting stronger that you need in pitching. So these are decisions that everybody has to make. But just so you know, as somebody who analyzes movement and works, overhead movements are not deleterious. In fact, this is again one of these hypocrisies. If you think an overhead movement is not good, then why would you have a pitcher throw long toss where he's throwing overhead? He's throwing up. Pitchers throw downhill. So if you think you shouldn't go up with weights, well then I don't know why you think you should throw a weighted ball or any ball up and over when you're throwing. So I want everyone to think about that as a little bit of hmm food for thought to make better decisions. The other thing that I heard that's awful is a strength coach for a minor league team wouldn't let anybody do chest presses off a bench. He told them you had to do it on the floor. He thought he was protecting the shoulder. When you take the stretch away, so for anybody who does a floor press, just try this. First of all, I don't know how you get the big dumbbells in your hands, but just try this. Do a floor press where you don't get a pre-stretch to the shoulder. You're you're coming from out of the bottom from the shoulder. So you're
It's
using your
all
shoulder
shoulder.
more.
Hmm.
Exactly. In fact, we teach that at the bottom of the bench press or bottom of a dumbbell press, you go to a place where it's perfect stretching, not overstretching, and
Hmm.
then you generate the movement from there, and then that becomes the prime mover. When you're doing floor presses, the shoulder's the prime mover. So I want
There's no stretch.
exactly, exactly. And then the last thing, you cannot simulate forces of a pitching motion in the gym. So when you're coming up with an exercise where you're thinking and you're using weights, let's say it is a medicine ball throw or some other thing where you're using a lot of weight and you're trying to simulate the forces, that is never, ever going to work because you can't simulate the forces of a skill like pitching in the gym. You can take the muscles that are working and make them strong in the way that they work in an exercise, and then the pitcher can take that muscle, take that reflex he's developed, and then he can perform better in his skill. But to take an exercise and try to duplicate it, usually if it's an action that's done quickly in the motion and you add weight to it, thinking you're improving it in the gym, you can cause problems not just for the muscle and injure the muscle, because when you're moving weight, other muscles have to come in to help you, but you also can actually be slowing down the pitcher in the sense that it's got a complex way the muscle's reacting, and you could actually change the natural movement that the pitcher has. So you have to be careful even when you're doing drills. The closer to the real skill that you are designing the drill for, or that the drill is, the more you have to know it. You use it as a drill, and then you have to get back to the real activity. So be very careful about being in the gym and thinking that that's where you're going to teach the speed of the movement. If you take the pitcher's body and you develop each muscle individually to be the best that it can be, and you look at the pitcher's body as a building that stands straight, and also with little units in it that each one of them contribute to the overall athletic skill of that pitcher, you will send that pitcher to the mound with a better body, and that in itself will improve the pitch that that pitcher is throwing. So when I see all these injuries, I feel like this should not be happening. So we have to look at injuries differently, and we have to look at the gym as the solution. And we also have to look at some of the contradictions that are going on where people are saying, let's do this to be safe. But then, right before our very eyes on the field, they're doing something that's actually unsafe or going to compromise the pitcher's bodies. These bodies are not being always compromised only in the motion. It's either their mechanics because their muscles aren't moving right, or it's something they're doing and outside of the mound that's causing the body to not be fresh when it pitches. But we can't just keep blaming pitching. We have to look to these other things and we have to expand our thinking.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Joe, we've covered a lot of territory today, and I thank you for being here because it's so great because I can show you off as a pitcher that never got injured, and I love that. And by the way, everyone, if you own my first pitch strike program, you'll see Joe there. How old were you when we did that, Joe? 10?
Yeah, I think I was 10 on
10
that
or
one.
12. I think you guys were, yeah. So my first pitch strike program is the warm up that I use for my guys' upper bodies, with the one with the light band. It's a great warm up program. So if you're searching for one, I recommend you take a look at that. Also, if you're interested in starting some arm training, and my book, Strength Training the Pitcher's Elbow, it's got in-season programs, it's got off-season programs, and, oh, by the way, it's got programs for youth, and this is one thing I wanna mention. Joe, you started when we were 11,
Hmm.
and, of course, you trained differently then than you did, of course, as you got older. But
Definitely.
there is no reason for youth pitchers to not be training their arms. And this is something that has to be done in science. I mean, when you study to be a strength coach, you have to learn these things. But other than they don't have the chemistry to be able to put on muscle, you're still getting other benefits to a youth pitcher actually training. The requirements, however, are that the exercises are selected carefully,
Hmm.
that technique is perfect, and that they're monitored by an adult who knows what they're doing so that they don't compromise any other part of their body by trying to work too heavy or not having the correct alignment. And structure and alignment and posture should be the first things that are taught whenever you bring anyone into the gym.
Yeah, technique is important. So learning it early is huge.
Exactly. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. That
Hmm.
that and that covers what you do on the mound. It also talks about what you do in the gym. So anyway, well listen, thank you everyone for tuning in. And you can go to my website, Angel Borrelli Pitching, to see my products that are designed to keep pitchers safe. And also please think about everything, because the more minds that start opening up to other ideas, the better the solutions will be for our pitchers. And we have to start trying to keep them safe. So I'll talk to you in 3 weeks. So thank you so much for listening. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Angel.